So this is how we can use SIMS to record age standardized scores. Now I'm starting with age standardized scores because in SIMS it's slightly more intuitive the way SIMS deals with age standardized scores. So I'm going to start off with perhaps what looks like the more complicated types of scores first. Now I've actually started off not in SIMS, as you'll notice, but within a spreadsheet basically, because this is often how age standardized scores are interpreted. What we have down the side here is a column B here, that contains the raw scores. 1 to 24 is the range of raw scores from the test, and along the top we've got the age in years and months of the pupil. So this is for 11-year-old pupils, and underneath here in each separate column we've got the standardized scores for that particular age group. So you can see there is like a sliding scale, so that if you get 15 on the raw test and you are just 11 years old, that translates to a standard score of 102. If you're a month older, that's a standard score of 100. A month older than that, 97, and so on. I've made up these numbers. They're not related to any particular tests, but you might notice the numbers themselves are actually based on how the DFE works out Key Stage 2 expected scores from the prior attainment groups, which are the raw scores down here. So I've based it on an authentic DFE example. So the things to note here before we go into SIMS are the intervals at the top, the years and the months age of the pupil there at the top, and it goes from 11 years 0 months all the way through to 12 years and 0 months, and it goes up there in increments of 2 months. The other thing to notice here is that the raw score goes from 1 all the way down to 24. Obviously your tables will vary somewhat, and SIMS is more than capable of dealing with different intervals along the top in terms of the age of the pupils and a range of different raw scores. You can more or less define whatever range of raw scores that you want. SIMS is very flexible like that. So okay, let's go back into SIMS. So here's SIMS, and we're going to use something called a lookup table in SIMS. And they're not very often used, they're hidden away, but they've been in SIMS for many years now, since the very first age standardized scores were put out by the DFE. So we can find lookup tables by going to Focus, down to Assessment, and down to Lookup Tables there. And you'll see the loads of lookup tables probably already on your system, most of them probably dating back to 2006, and even before 2006. They haven't been particularly used much up until quite recently. They seem to have come back into fashion. So if we want to create our own lookup table, we can click the New button here, and it comes up with this screen. We have to give the lookup table a name. I'm going to put a hashtag in front of mine just so I can find it easier later. I'm just going to call it demo lookup. And the type of lookup table that we're creating depends very much on the output. So the output is going to be a number in the range 0 to about 150. So it's a number for in the first instance, and it's also whole numbers. There's no fractional numbers in that table. So this is a marks integer lookup table, so we'll choose that there. Then in section 2 we have to put our ages in there, and if you remember from that table, the ages went from 11 years / 00 months to 12 years 00 months, and the step was going up in 2s, so every 2 months there was a different score. So that's what the step means there. That's the increment you've got month on month. And they were ordered in ascending order. They went from 11 to 12 months. So 11 years to 12 years. And then the scores, if you remember the scores were the rows, the range of the scores in there was basically these are my raw scores. So the range was from 1 to 24. And they were going up one by one, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. All the way up to 24, so the step is 1, and they're in ascending order, so I'll put that as ascending. And then here is where, if we want to, we can click the apply button, and that creates a blank form for us to fill out. And if we wanted to, we could actually tap into each of these cells. We could tap in what the corresponding scaled score was. So you could go down this list and just bob them in by hand if you wanted to, if you had time. But obviously that can take a while. So we have got a slightly better way of doing that. You remember my spreadsheet that I showed at first? Well, what we can do is we can paste in the contents of that spreadsheet. So if I go back to my spreadsheet, if I highlight, I've already kind of done this, but if I highlight the part of the spreadsheet that I want to copy, which is just that little inner bit there, Control C, back into SIMS, and I should be able to paste that in there. Now it warns me that it's going to overwrite everything that I've just tapped into the table there. Well, that's absolutely fine, it was rubbish. So I can tap that in and say, yes, that's fine. So that's a quicker way of filling out this particular grid. So there we go. That should all work fine. Sometimes if you don't get the spreadsheet formatted perfectly right, a tip is sometimes when spreadsheets see numbers in this format, 11/00, they automatically try and interpret it either as a division formula or as a date. That often throws SIMS. So what I had to do here, and what you probably have to do whether you're using Google Drive or whether you're using Excel, is format, make sure that these headers here, these dates, not dates, the ages and months really, those, make sure they're formatted as text. Like I say, quite often spreadsheets will try and format them as dates. So usually what I do is I go across to find the format option, which is always in different places. Let's just try it from here. So highlight the cells there, click on format, number, and make sure it stays as plain text. I think originally it was automatic. And just make sure it's on plain text so it's not trying to format that in any other way. That's a tip anyway. It might not be a problem for you. So back into SIMS now. And that's practically it. That's all we've got. That's all we need to do. We now have a lookup table and we can let SIMS do the hard work now of converting our raw scores into scaled scores, age standardized scaled scores in this case. How might we do that? Okay, I'm going to assume here that you know all about aspects and result sets and templates in SIMS. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go into Assessment Manager, so that's Focus, Assessment, and Aspect this time, because I want to create two aspects. One aspect to hold the raw score. Now your system might already have this aspect. I strongly suspect most of your systems will have an aspect that holds the raw score, so you might not need to create this aspect at all. And I'll also create an aspect that holds the result, the number that we're looking to calculate. And again, you've probably already got that aspect on your system. So for you, it'll probably just be a matter of identifying where your raw score is as an aspect and where your scaled score is as an aspect. But I'm going to create mine from scratch here. So I'm going to create a new aspect. Click new there under new aspect. Put a little hashtag in front. This is the raw score. You'll probably have raw score maths, raw score reading. I'm just going to call this raw score demo. And as we said before, the raw score is an integer number. And it's in the range 1 to 24. There we go. So that's the raw score aspect created. Now I'm going to create a second aspect called scaled score. And this is based on age. So I'll call it scaled score age. And if you remember, that was a number, I think in the range, well, certainly 0 to 150 should cover it. Again, it was a marks integer, that's the default at the moment, so I'll leave that as it is to marks integer. And like I said, somewhere in the range of 1 to 150. If I knew a bit more about the test, I could be more specific, but it doesn't really matter, to be honest, because the formula will only come up with valid values for that. So that's a new aspect created there. So I now have my two aspects that I need to run the formula with. So again now I'm going to create a little template which will allow me then to create a mark sheet just to test it with. You've probably already got a template that you want to add this formula into. So I already created one while I was practicing this. I'll just get rid of that one. I'll click on New, Scaled Score Demo. And this is going to be a very, very simple mark sheet. It's just going to have two columns on, raw score and scaled score. So the first one is going to be the raw score. That does need to be a data entry column because that's how I'm going to type the scores in the first place. You will, I think, on your system probably choose a result set. You don't have to, so I'm not going to do it on here. But on yours, I would imagine you're using result sets properly, and therefore you will already have a result set in mind that you want to apply to this column. And I just need to pick up that raw score aspect now. There it is, there's the raw score demo aspect. And then the second column, and this is where we use that lookup formula, the lookup table. So this is where the important bit happens. So I'm going to click on New. I'm going to click on Data Entry using Formula. And there are two formula options here. It has to be data entry because I want to put the results of this formula in that new aspect that I've just created, the scaled score aspect that I've just created. So make sure you choose Add a Column for data entry using a formula and click Next. Again, use whatever result set you're using. I'm going to leave that blank for now, but you'll probably want to use a result set there. And the aspect for the column is the second of the two new ones. This is the result, if you like. This is the result we're looking to fill out. So I'll click on Select. On the formula type, well, it's this one. It's the lookup formula, which is possibly one you'd never used before, but obviously this is the one that relates back to the lookup table that we've just created. So I'll leave the default heading as it is there because it's good enough. And it's basically asking for two things. It's basically saying, okay, column. Which column holds the raw score and which lookup table should it use? So the column that holds the raw score, well, it's easy on this template because I've only got one other column. So that's dead straightforward. So I'll choose that one. It's the raw score. Click on Select. And then the lookup table that I want to use is the one that I created a few moments ago. Which is that one. And you can ignore the optional effective date. I'll talk a bit more about dates in a minute, but we can ignore the optional effective date here. And I usually make these read only because there's no reason why, if the formula's there and working, why you'd ever want an end user to be able to type in their own scaled scores. So I'll click on Finish. And I'll save that. Well, first of all, create a mark sheet from that template. So I'll go down to section 3, Mark Sheets. And I'll create one here. This is a primary school example, so this is a year 6 group. Now make sure at this stage, of course, year 6s correspond in their ages. Most of them are between 11 and 12 years old, so this will pick up pupils in the right age group. But lookup tables with ages on the top are very sensitive to those ages. Now if it finds a pupil on this mark sheet who's not in that age range, you won't get any error messages and there'll be no indication. It'll just refuse to work out a scaled score for them. And that's the only clue you get. So sometimes I've spent many a happy hour hunting for errors in the formula, only to find out later that actually the pupils I was looking at were the wrong age group or something like that. So just a tip while you're debugging these things. Make sure that you've always got the right age group for the pupils for the lookup table that you're using. So that's the year 6s anyway, so let's click apply there. That's great, we can save that now. And let's open up this mark sheet then and see what we've got. Okay, well here's our column for our raw scores in there. And we can start tapping in raw scores in the range 1 to 24 straight away. But before you do, age standardized scores. they've relied very much on us establishing the correct age of the pupil on the date of the test. And if we don't establish that, the whole thing falls apart. And of course, normally in mark sheets, we're used to just tapping in results here. And we traditionally completely ignore this box here that says result date. It usually defaults to today's date. And for 99% of the time, it makes no difference whatsoever whether we look at that or change it or whatever. But for exams where you've got an age-related outcome, then it's very important that the result date we put there corresponds with the date of the test. Because what SIMS will do is it will use that result set. It will then work out how old each of these pupils was on the date of the test and put them into the corresponding column in our results. So we can't not fill out this column. So I'm going to pretend that I actually administered that test way back in January. And if I just make sure it now says January, and now I start typing in my raw scores, the raw scores get tagged, if you like, with the date of that test. So now when I'm tapping raw scores in, it will accept them, and that's absolutely fine. That's what we'd expect. So I'm putting a range of scores in here. It might be. If I now press the calculate button, there we go. It's picked up the scores. Now it's got some gaps in there, and I'm thinking, why is there a gap there? Why has some of those pupils not got a score in there? That's what I was talking about earlier. Notice or remember that on my lookup table, I only had pupils who were from 11 years 0 months through to 12 years 0 months old. I strongly suspect that if I add some extra columns on there, you can right click on the student header there and click on select additional student columns. We can put in the age in years and months. And so let's see what's happened here. So this is the current age, this is the chronological age, today's age of these pupils. And here's Harvey here, who is 11 years 2 months old, but back in January rather, he was 10. So it's not worked out a result for him. He was 10 years, whatever it is, 10 months old back in January. So it's not worked out a result for him. For the other pupils, though, it has worked out a result, and it's worked out the result based on the age, not as they are now, but as they were on that date there. And it's working very well. That's the basics. That's the key things to look for, and perhaps they illustrate rather well why you've got to be very careful about the dates that you put on. Having said that, for most of you, the tables that we're bringing in, that's, where is it? This table here, these are usually set by whoever's administering the test. So long as you administer the test to the right pupils at the right time, and remember to put the right result date onto your mark sheets, you shouldn't get any gaps on your results, because that won't occur. Okay, that's age standardised scores in SIMS. And in the next lecture, I'll take you through the easy ways to use a lookup table in exactly the same way, but for the non-age standardised scores, the ones that don't need to be dependent on the pupil's age on the day of the test.